The scent of lavender lingered in our bedroom, an elusive trace of the woman who had once filled it with laughter and life. Now, all it carried was the sting of betrayal. Sarah had always adored lavender. It was her signature fragrance, the one thing in our home that was distinctly hers. But in the quiet aftermath of her affair, I realized it had become a mocking reminder of what our marriage had turned into. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. Late nights at work. Weekend conferences in other cities. A distant look in her eyes whenever I tried to connect. I'm not naive. I saw the signs, but I chose to ignore them. I loved her with a desperation that clouded my judgment. Perhaps I wanted to believe in the fairy tale we had built together, the one where we grew old, hand in hand, still irritating each other with our silly habits. And then came the confirmation. The brutal, soul-crushing kind. It was a phone left unlocked, a string of messages, words that had once been meant for me, now directed at another man. My stomach twisted, my head swam, and rage seared through me. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way she had so casually tossed aside everything we had built, our vows, our dreams, all of it. But the worst part, the thing that still makes my jaw clench months later, happened that night at her annual girls' gathering. It was a tradition. Every year, a group of her college friends would converge at our house for cocktails and gossip. I'd always found them a bit much, but I tolerated it because Sarah loved them, and I loved her. That night, though, the atmosphere felt different. There was an air of smugness I hadn't noticed before, laughter bouncing off the walls, punctuated by knowing glances. I poured myself a drink, the bitter taste of whiskey matching the one rising in my throat. Sarah was the center of attention, as usual. Her voice rang out, high-pitched and confident, as she regaled her friends with stories that somehow always seemed to include a dig at me. "Oh, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness, "he's so predictable. He always brings me flowers on our anniversary. So boring, right, girls?" They laughed, a chorus of high-pitched agreement. It was like watching a pack of hyenas circle a wounded animal. Each jab was carefully placed, disguised as harmless banter. She mocked my cooking, my taste in music, even the way I slept. With every word, I felt myself shrinking, the color draining from my face as my heart grew heavier with shame. But the worst of it came when she giggled, raising her wine glass. "You know, sometimes I feel like I'm living with a houseplant," she said, gesturing toward me. "He just sits there, watches TV. So passive." That was it. The dam broke. A surge of cold, calculated anger replaced the hot, reactive fury that had been simmering inside me. I was done being the punching bag, the quiet, dependable husband she could mock so easily. I took a deep breath, my gaze sweeping over the faces of her friends. They were waiting for me to flinch, to shrink under their judgment. I refused to give them the satisfaction. I excused myself, my voice calm even as my blood boiled. I walked upstairs, each step measured and purposeful, my mind already shifting into strategy. I wasn't thinking about her anymore, not really. I was thinking about what I was about to do. I opened my laptop and navigated to a private folder I had created weeks before. Screenshots, recordings, texts, everything I had painstakingly gathered. At first, I had collected it out of desperation, hoping to salvage what was left of us. But now, it was my weapon. I copied everything to a USB drive, grabbed the small projector I used for movie nights, and walked back downstairs into the lion's den. The room fell silent the moment I entered. All eyes were on me. Sarah's voice, tight with a hint of unease, broke the silence. "What's that?" "A presentation," I said, my voice flat. I set the projector on the coffee table, aimed it at the blank wall, and plugged in my USB. As the first message flashed onto the wall, a wave of stunned silence swept over the room. "I can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Mark is so boring. He would never know the kind of passion I've found with you." Her friend Melissa gasped. Each message, each image, each recording played out in painful detail, irrefutable proof of Sarah's betrayal. There were pictures of her with another man, someone I knew she worked with. There were voice notes, whispers filled with promises, lies. The room seemed to shrink as the truth unfolded before them. Their laughter faded, replaced by shocked gasps and muttered exclamations. Sarah's face drained of color, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked like someone had punched her in the gut. The confident, mocking woman I had known only moments before had vanished, leaving behind a pitiful, cornered animal. Her friends looked equally stunned, their faces masks of disbelief and discomfort. They had been complicit in her cruelty, in her mockery of me. Now, they were getting a front row seat to her downfall. The energy in the room had shifted. They weren't laughing anymore. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The evidence did all the talking. The betrayal was undeniable. The slideshow ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. Sarah burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. Her face buried in her hands, she wept like a child. Her friends, usually so quick to offer comfort, sat frozen, their faces etched with awkwardness and shame. No one moved to help her. No one knew what to say. I stood there, calm, almost detached. The anger had subsided, replaced by a quiet sense of vindication. I had faced my humiliation, and now I had exposed hers. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and steady. I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of a dramatic confrontation. I'm not going to yell or scream. The evidence speaks for itself. I glanced at her friends, still shell-shocked, their faces pale. I think it's time you all went home. I turned and walked out of the living room, leaving her in her tears, surrounded by the silence of her suddenly uncomfortable friends. I went upstairs, grabbed a bag, and started throwing my clothes into it. I didn't look back. Later that night, I sat on the balcony of my temporary apartment, overlooking the city lights. The cool night air felt like a balm to my soul. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of release, a lightness I hadn't known. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, divorce, financial fallout, emotional wreckage, but I was ready. I had taken back my power. I had found my voice. The lavender-scented house was behind me now, a painful memory. It was time to breathe fresh air.